British students have been reading about Florence Nightingale, a celebrated nurse who tended to the wounded during the Crimean War back in the 19th century, in their history classes for decades. But recently, Florence Nightingale has been joined by another nurse on the pages of history school books.
Many years ago, in the 1970s, I was approached by a group of women who'd come from the Caribbean originally to fight for Britain in the Second World War in 1939. And they were trying to find the grave of Mary Seacole, who was a Crimean War nurse who was from Jamaica.
Once the grave was located, the initiative group came up with an idea to put a monument to Mary Seacole. So decades later, when Lord Soley left the House of Commons and had more time, he set up the charity to do a statue to Mary Seacole.
So we raised most of the money from small donations, schools, hospitals, nurses, army units, all of that sort of thing. And then recently I got a large grant towards it to finish it off, and I'm hoping it will be unveiled by a member of the royal family in June of this year.
The monument to Mary Seacole will be placed here, near St. Thomas Hospital. It'll be facing the Parliament, right across the river. As part of the project, the sculptor traveled to Crimea to get the rock impressions from the centuries-old battlefield. And he says they got there just in time. To see the sculptor, we traveled to his studio in Hanborough, near Oxford. There, Martin Jennings told us about his trip to Crimea in September of 2013.
We researched the site and we took the impression of the ground. And then we came away again. I wouldn't have imagined it would be nearly as easy to do it today. Apart from anything else, we would be commemorating a battle that was lost by the Russians.
The site where Mr. Jennings and his team went to in Crimea was near Balaclava, just a few kilometers away from Russian naval base. The sculptor was impressed with the beautiful scenery, but there was something else that struck him.
It was nonetheless very clear that many battles had been fought over this land, not only in the Crimean War, but in the Second World War and at other times as well. So there was this contrast between this beautiful land and this bloody history.
The monument to Mary Seacole will consist of two elements: a 3-meter-high bronze figure of the nurse and 4.5-meter-high bronze disc bearing an impression of the ground in Crimea. At night, the two elements will be connected by illumination.
The idea of illuminating her so that her shadow fell onto the ground where she once stood 150 years ago was one that I thought would make a more interesting monument.
With the Russian occupation of Crimea, the monument to Mary Seacole might bring up the Crimean problem again.
I think the whole occupation of the Crimea and the activities of the Russian government, they are very, very sad, actually, and bad for the people in Ukraine and ultimately for the people of Russia, too.
If everything goes as planned, the monument will be unveiled this summer. Among other things, it'll be very symbolic. A piece of Crimean land will be placed in the center of London, facing the Parliament. The land which is now occupied by Russia, the country that lost the war to Great Britain back in the day, but which gave birth to this monument. This is Volodymyr Solub and Dmytro Orlov reporting from London and Hanborough for Ukraine Today.